Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Monday, October 6th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, a judge blocks Trump's National Guard deployment in Oregon, plus a new Supreme Court term is here, and how this administration wants control over agencies like the FCC. A federal judge has temporarily blocked President Donald Trump from deploying 200 Oregon National Guard troops to Portland in response to a lawsuit. The move blocks Trump from sending troops at least until October 18th. The Trump-appointed U.S. District Judge stated there was no evidence that recent protests had escalated to the level of a rebellion or seriously interfered with law enforcement. The White House said it would appeal. In a late September post on Truth Social, Trump had said he directed Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. Lawyers from the Oregon Attorney General's office had told federal officials that the Portland protests were small and sedate. The Supreme Court launches a new term this week. I caught up with USA Today Supreme Court correspondent Maureen Groppe for a look ahead. Maureen, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's just start with President Trump's tariffs. How is the High Court set to tackle issues around these in the coming months?
The court's going to hear two challenges to the sweeping tariffs that the president has imposed. Lower courts have said that Trump overstepped when he used a 1977 law to impose tariffs on imports from most of the world's countries. He's the first president to try to use the law in that way, and tariffs are the centerpiece of his economic agenda as well as a major foreign policy tool for him. So it's going to be a very big deal no matter what the court decides, whether it lets him be the first president to impose tariffs in this way, even though it's Congress that generally has the power to tax under the Constitution, or whether the court says, yeah, he doesn't have that authority and takes away one of his major policy initiatives.
Well, Maureen, you're right here that court watchers expect the conservative majority to side with the president on the issue of presidential control over independent agencies. What more can you tell our listeners here?
90 years ago, the court said it's constitutional to prevent members of the Federal Trade Commission from being fired without cause, but the court has been chipping away at that precedent in recent years, and Trump thinks they should completely overturn it. He's been testing it by firing members of the Trade Commission and other independent agencies, and the court has allowed him to do that while it decides this issue in a case that it's going to hear in December. But there's a related but different case the court just agreed to hear in January about whether Trump can fire a member of the Federal Reserve. In the other cases, Trump says he can remove agency leaders for any reason. In the Federal Reserve case, Trump agrees that he does need a reason, but he says he has one.
Well, in this piece, you bring up a 2001 campaign spending restriction. What was this, Maureen, and why is it back in the news?
Yeah, in 2001, the court limited how much political parties can spend on advertising and other messaging in coordination with a federal candidate. That is being challenged in a case that was brought in part by Vice President J.D. Vance when he was a senator. Vance and the Republican Party argue that things have changed since that previous decision. And as a result, they say the political parties have been weakened and top donors are turning to what are called super PACs that they say act as shadow parties, and that's hurting the political system. Democrats, on the other hand, say one thing hasn't changed, and that's the need to prevent corruption by limiting coordinated expenditures.
Well, meanwhile, non-black voters are challenging the two majority black districts on Louisiana's congressional map. What's at stake in this case, Maureen?
There are several things at stake. The most direct is what Louisiana's congressional map looks like. If the court says the state can keep a map with two majority black districts, that gives Democrats an advantage in that state. But if the court throws out the map, they could do it in a way with major implications, and that includes potentially gutting a section of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that right now protects the ability of minorities to elect their candidates of choice.
Well, some of the more controversial cases of the term appear to center on transgender issues. What are some of the cases justices will be taking a look at here?
One of the first cases they will hear this month is a challenge to Colorado's ban on what's often called conversion therapy, and that's the attempt to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. And close to half the states regulate this in some way. But a Colorado counselor says that the law there infringes on her free speech rights under the First Amendment. The court is also going to hear challenges to states' ban on transgender athletes competing on girls' and women's sports teams. They could decide that case narrowly, But if they go broad, that case could have implications not just for sports, but for other disputes such as bathroom restrictions for transgender people.
All right, lots coming up. Maureen Grappi covers the Supreme Court for USA Today. Thank you, Maureen.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump is warning of complete obliteration if Hamas insists on staying in power in Gaza. Hamas said on Friday it had agreed to release all Israeli hostages, alive or dead, under the term of Trump's 20-point Gaza peace plan and is expected to enter mediated negotiations to discuss the details in Egypt this week. Gaza would also be redeveloped, according to the proposal text, with the option for Palestinians who want to remain to stay. Hamas fighters would get amnesty, and the territory would come under temporary governance by a new Palestinian committee that would be overseen by a board of peace. Trump would personally chair the panel alongside other foreign leaders. You can follow along throughout the week on usatoday.com. In the aftermath of Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, it's clear the Trump administration wants control of agencies like the FCC. I spoke with USA Today government accountability reporter Erin Mansfield for more. Thanks for hopping on, Erin.
Thank you for having me.
So, President Trump has suggested revoking the government-issued broadcasting licensees for television stations that cover him negatively. Erin, can you just refresh us on what he said exactly here?
So Donald Trump was in a gaggle with some White House reporters right after Jimmy Kimmel Live was suspended and pulled off the air for several days. And he said, the press, they're 97% against him. He said, they only give me bad publicity or press. He said, I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away. It'll be up to Brendan Carr. And that is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Carr was the one who made a comment that has been widely criticized, saying that networks can either deal with Jimmy Kimmel the easy way or the hard way, which a lot of people criticized and took as a threat to his job. And then when he was taken off the air for several days, people saw it as bowing to the threat. Kimmel had made a comment related to Charlie Kirk's assassin, and that's what happened there.
Yeah, well, Erin, more broadly, Trump's administration is clearly pushing to get more control over the FCC. What steps are they taking specifically to try and make this happen?
So the FCC is one of dozens and dozens of independent federal agencies. It's not really the executive branch. It's not Congress. It's not really a court. And there are dozens and dozens of agencies just like this. So what Donald Trump has been doing is he's been going around to these agencies, firing their leaders, getting sued, and then telling the court, no, any laws protecting them are unconstitutional. They're actually going to get that case trying to throw out a major Supreme Court precedent from 90 years ago. They're going to get that heard in December. And so far, the Supreme Court has been allowing these people to remain fired while the case goes forward. That's usually a signal of what they believe and where things are going. If you talk to legal experts, they'll tell you Supreme Court has put the writing on the wall for years on overturning this precedent, but it's really part of a broader push to get control over independent agencies. And just to be clear, that this isn't something that just randomly came from the Trump administration. This is a hugely backed legal theory on the right, originated in the 80s. Antonin Scalia, the late very conservative justice, has been called the patron saint of the legal theory that underlies this. But what we're in for as a country is a government that just looks very different going forward, even different from what my grandparents might have been used to.
Yeah, well, Erin, can you just help us understand some of the history behind the FCC? You touched on this a bit, and just how this moment and this administration's approach is really unprecedented.
The FCC started in 1934 under the Communications Act. And actually, at the time, it was more of an advisory committee. So it has evolved quite a bit over the years. But, most of us Americans think of the FCC as the agency that kind of comes out of the shadows whenever someone curses or says something inappropriate on TV. They'll find broadcasters and whatnot. But they really oversee a lot of things that have to do with what we see on television. And to be fair, I was speaking to Brent Skorup from the Cato Institute, who was describing how other presidents, Franklin D. Roosevelt, JFK, Nixon, have put pressure on the FCC to do what they want, but they've done it privately. What's completely new here is that Donald Trump is openly calling to rescind broadcasting licenses. And that's something that no one has really dared do. Even though those other presidents have kind of put their thumb on the scale, there were very specific instances. It wasn't nearly as broad as saying basically anyone who is broadcasting biased against him should have their license revoked.
All right, this was a really interesting story, Aaron. We have a link to the full piece in today's show notes. Aaron Mansfield covers government accountability for USA Today. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much.
It's Kind Time. The first Monday of every month, we bring you a positive story to brighten your day. Today's is about a tiny goat who, with the help of a couple of sheepdogs and their human, was given a chance to thrive after a difficult birth. Humankind's Allison Moses has the story.
When a baby goat's birth did not go as planned on Julia Stewart's farm, she was forced to make a hard decision.
Beginning of June, we had some triplets born from our pygmy goats. Normally our pygmy goats are fine, they normally do brilliantly, but unfortunately one of the triplets, the second one to be born, was very, very small. She was literally less than 500 grams, very, very weak, could hardly stand.
That was Julia Stewart, a UK-based farm manager who oversees life at Studley Grange Farm Park. Because the goat's health was so compromised, Julia decided to intervene. After naming her Lil, she bottle-fed her, made her a jacket out of a sock, and gave her a fighting chance at survival.
Along her journey, 2 farm collies have taken her under their wing. The older dog just mothered her, and the younger dog, who's only 9 months herself and a puppy, had a new play friend, and actually little Lil and Naya are completely inseparable.
Now, Lil is big and strong, just like the others, thanks to her adoptive family of sheepdogs and humans.
To see more Humankind stories like this, head on over to usatoday.com/humankind. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.